There's a photograph from February 2019 that Chevrolet's legal team tried very hard to suppress. It shows a covered vehicle on a transport truck parked outside a testing facility in the Mojave Desert. The tarp had slipped, just enough. What the camera captured was an outline, a silhouette that violated 70 years of American automotive doctrine. Within 6 hours, the image had been shared across 43 countries. Within 12, Chevrolet's PR department released a statement that was, by all accounts, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. They called it damage control, but the damage was already conceptual, because what that photograph revealed wasn't just a new car, it was a confession. For 70 decades, American performance engineering had operated on a single, immovable principle. The engine belongs in front. It was identity. It was theology. And on that day in the desert, with a tarp barely concealing the truth, Chevrolet admitted they'd been wrong the entire time. The question isn't why they finally built a mid-engine Corvette. The question is what they knew that forced them to abandon everything the car had ever been. The Corvette was born as a compromise in 1953, a sports car that wasn't quite European, a performance vehicle that couldn't quite commit. For 66 years, every generation followed the same architecture: front engine, rear-wheel drive, long hood, American proportions. It wasn't the fastest layout, it was never the most balanced, but it was theirs. Engineers inside GM knew this. They'd known it since 1960. Zora Arkus Duntov, the man who turned the Corvette into a cosmetic experiment into a legitimate performance machine, spent 15 years trying to convince leadership to move the engine. He built prototypes, he demonstrated lap times, he showed them the physics, and every time he was told the same thing: Americans don't buy mid-engine cars. He died in 1996, having never seen his vision realized. But something shifted in the 2010s, something unspoken. The supercar market had evolved into a space where American manufacturers were no longer competitive. Ferrari, McLaren, Lamborghini, they weren't just faster, they existed in a different category of engineering credibility. The Corvette, no matter how much horsepower Chevrolet added, was still seen as a muscle car wearing a tuxedo. And then the data started coming in. Customer surveys revealed something uncomfortable. Corvette owners were aging out. The average owner was 58 years old. Worse, they weren't buying the car for performance, they were buying it for nostalgia, for what it represented, not what it could do. The Corvette had become a tribute to itself. Chevrolet faced a choice: let the car die with dignity or do something unforgivable. They chose violence. The C8 project, codenamed Emperor, was not a redesign. It was an assassination. Everything that identified a Corvette was stripped away. The long hood, gone. The front engine proportions, gone. The visual lineage that connected it back to 1953, severed. What remained was a machine that looked like it had been designed in Maranello, not Detroit. But the layout change was just the surface. What Chevrolet understood, what they'd been quietly studying for a decade, is that mid-engine architecture doesn't just improve performance, it changes the psychological contract between driver and machine. In a front-engine car, the mass is ahead of you. You feel like you're steering it, guiding it, negotiating with it. The car responds to your inputs, but there's a conversation happening, a delay, a transaction. In a mid-engine car, the mass is behind your shoulders. You are the fulcrum. The car doesn't respond to you, it rotates around you. The sensation isn't control, it's inhabitation. You don't drive the car, you wear it. Chevrolet knew this would be a problem, because the Corvette's entire cultural identity had been built on accessibility, on the idea that raw American power was something any driver could handle, could understand, could survive. It was supposed to be democratic, friendly even, a working man's supercar. The C8 removed that safety net. The first test drivers reported something unusual. They described the car as responsive to the point of paranoia. One engineer used the term psychologically forward biased. What they meant was this: the C8 anticipated inputs before drivers consciously made them. Small steering corrections, minute weight transfers, things that would go unnoticed in a front-engine platform resulted in immediate, undeniable changes in trajectory. This is what happens when you concentrate 60% of a car's mass within a 6-foot radius behind the driver. Physics becomes intimate. Mistakes become amplified. Chevrolet could have softened this. They could have added electronic nannies, dulled the steering response, programmed in hesitation. They didn't. The stability control system in the C8 allows far more slip angle than any previous Corvette. The throttle mapping is aggressive. The steering ratio is 15.7:1, sharp enough that professional drivers called it nervous. These were not oversights. These were decisions. And when journalists asked why, Chevrolet's official answer was always the same. We wanted it to feel like a true mid-engine supercar. What they didn't say was that they wanted it to feel dangerous.
The pricing strategy confirmed this. When the C8 was announced at $59,999, less than $60,000 for a mid-engine supercar, the automotive press called it revolutionary. They called it disruptive. They were correct, but not for the reasons they thought. Chevrolet had just made a car with the reflexes of a McLaren, financially accessible to drivers who had never experienced mid-engine dynamics, people who had spent their entire driving lives in front-engine muscle cars, people who had no reference point for how the C8 would behave at the limit. Insurance companies noticed immediately. Within the first 8 months of production, collision rates for the C8 were 43% higher than the outgoing C7, not because of mechanical failure, because of driver error, specifically a phenomenon insurers called rotational overcorrection incidents. Translation: drivers were spinning the car to save it. This wasn't incompetence, it was architecture. The C8 forgives differently than a front-engine car. It demands predictions instead of reactions, and when predictions are wrong, the consequences are instantaneous. Chevrolet knew this would happen. They knew because it had happened before. In the 1970s, Porsche faced a crisis with the 911, rear-engine layout, sudden violent oversteer, a reputation for killing inexperienced drivers who lifted off the throttle mid-corner. The automotive press called it the Widowmaker. Porsche's solution was education, driving schools, graduated performance models, cultural conditioning. Chevrolet chose a different path. They built the C8 with driver modes that could be switched at any time, even mid-corner. They installed a 495-horsepower V8 with zero turbo lag. They made the car so responsive that it felt invincible, right until it wasn't. And then they marketed it to the exact demographic most vulnerable to that illusion. The advertising campaigns didn't feature professional drivers. They featured regular people, enthusiasts, everyday heroes, as one commercial called them. The message was clear. This is still a Corvette. You can still handle it. But the car had changed. The engineers had built something that punished assumptions. By 2021, a pattern had emerged in accident reports. The majority of C8 crashes shared 3 characteristics. 1. Dry pavement, good weather, clear visibility. 2. Relatively low speeds, 30 to 50 miles per hour in most cases. 3. The driver had owned the car for less than 3 months. This wasn't a mechanical defect, it was an onboarding failure. The C8 required unlearning, and Chevrolet had given buyers no reason to think that was necessary. One dealership in Florida began requiring C8 buyers to sign a waiver acknowledging they'd watched the 20-minute instructional video. Another in California offered a complimentary track day with purchase. These were not corporate initiatives. These were individual dealers trying to prevent lawsuits. Chevrolet's official response was a software update that made the traction control slightly more intrusive in weather mode. The crashes continued.
But something unexpected happened. The C8 started winning, Not just in sales, though it obliterated every production target, but in legitimacy. Professional drivers praised it. Magazines put it on their covers. It lapped tracks faster than cars costing 3 times as much. For the first time in the Corvette's history, European manufacturers saw it as a threat. And the more dangerous it proved to be in the hands of amateurs, the more desirable it became. This is the part Chevrolet understood that no one wants to say out loud. Danger enhances value. Not theoretical danger, real statistical documented danger. The kind that shows up in insurance premiums. The kind that generates forum threads titled, "Crashed my C8 after 2 weeks, what did I do wrong?" Because embedded in those crashes was proof. Proof that the car wasn't pretending. Proof that it had teeth. Proof that it would punish you if you weren't good enough. And in the supercar market, that's not a liability. That's credibility. The C8 Z06, released in 2023, made this explicit. 670 horsepower, naturally aspirated flat-plane crank V8 that revs to 8,600 RPM. Aero package generating 734 pounds of downforce at 186 miles per hour. Chevrolet called it the most track-capable Corvette ever built. What they meant was, we've removed all the compromises. The Z06 doesn't pretend to be approachable. It doesn't apologize for its reflexes. It is, by design, a car that separates drivers into 2 categories, those who can exploit it and those who fear it. And the waiting list was 2 years before the first unit shipped. This is what the C8 revealed about American automotive culture. The lie wasn't that Americans wanted accessible performance. The lie was that they wanted it to stay accessible. What they actually wanted, what they'd always wanted, was permission to fail spectacularly. There's a video that circulates on Corvette forums, dashcam footage from a C8 Z06 on a canyon road in Southern California. The driver enters a decreasing radius turn at moderate speed, begins to add throttle too early. The rear steps out. He corrects, but the correction is imprecise. The car snaps the other direction. He corrects again, harder. The oscillation amplifies. 3 seconds later, the Z06 is sliding backwards into a rock face at 40 miles per hour. The driver was a professional automotive journalist with 15 years of experience. He walked away uninjured. The car was totaled. The video's description includes one line: "This is not a Corvette. This is something else." He meant it as a warning. Chevrolet read it as a victory.
The C8 didn't just change what a Corvette could be. It changed what American manufacturers believed they were allowed to build. Ford's response was the GT. Dodge's response was to kill the Viper entirely. Chevrolet's response was to keep pushing. The E-Ray, the ZR1, the Zora, each one more uncompromising than the last. Because they learned something the European manufacturers had known for decades. You don't sell supercars by making them safe. You sell them by making people prove they deserve to drive them. The final production numbers tell the story. Over 150,000 C8 Corvettes sold in the first 4 years, more than any previous generation in the same time frame. Conquest buyers, people who'd never owned a Corvette, made up 38% of purchases. Average owner age dropped to 47, and the crash rate never improved. Because the car was never designed to be improved. It was designed to be exactly what it is, a machine that forces consequences, that makes you earn every ounce of its performance, that will not, under any circumstance, pretend to be something it isn't. America was never supposed to build this car. Not because it couldn't, because it spent 70 years convincing itself it shouldn't, that raw performance needed to be restrained, that accessibility was more important than authenticity, that the customer was always right, even when they were wrong. The C8 ended that conversation. It is the car American engineers always wanted to build, delivered to the customer they always feared. And now, every time someone posts a crash video, every time the insurance data updates, every time a new buyer discovers just how little the car will forgive, Chevrolet doesn't flinch. Because they've finally done what Zora Arkin-Duntov begged them to do 60 years ago. They stopped apologizing for building something that bites back.